house looked ordinary. That's what made it so unsettling. A quiet suburban home in Frederick, Colorado. Clean driveway. Children's toys scattered across the lawn. The kind of place where nothing should go wrong. And yet, everything had. On the morning of August 13th, 2018, a neighbor security camera would capture something small, almost forgettable. A man pacing. A truck backed into a driveway. Movements that, at first glance, meant nothing. But later, they would mean everything. This is the story of the Watts family murders. It started with a missing person report. Shannon Watts, pregnant, vibrant, active on social media, had vanished. So had her two young daughters, Bella and Celeste. Their car was still in the garage. Her phone left behind. Her purse untouched. To investigators, those details whispered something chilling. People don't just leave like that. Her husband, Chris Watts, appeared on local news within hours. Calm, composed, pleading for their return. If they're out there, just come back. He stood in front of the camera with his hands loosely folded, his voice steady, too steady. And yet, to the untrained eye, he looked like a grieving husband. But grief has a rhythm, a fracture, visible weight. Chris was then seen weighed down. Behind the scenes, something far darker was unraveling. Shanann's friend had been the first to raise the alarm. She knew something was wrong almost immediately. Shannon wasn't answering calls. She had a doctor's appointment she never missed. It was unlike her. And unlike her became the phrase that cracked everything open. Police entered the home. Nothing looked disturbed. No signs of struggle. No broken furniture. No forced entry. Just absence. The kind that echoes. Investigators began building a timeline. The last confirmed sighting of Sean was in the early hours of the morning. She had returned home from a business trip. Security footage showed her walking inside. Alive. After that, silence. Chris claimed he woke up later, had an emotional conversation with Sean, and then left for work. He said she took the girls and left after he did. It sounded plausible. But plausibility is not truth. Then came the neighbor. He invited Chris and police into his home to review security footage. The same footage from that quiet morning. Chris stood there, arms crossed, watching himself on screen. At first, he seemed confident, relaxed. Then the video played. His truck backed into the driveway. Something the neighbor noted was unusual. Chris rarely did that. The footage showed him loading something into the truck. Again and again, his body language shifted. Subtle at first, a tightening of the jaw, a shift in posture. The confident husband began to unravel without saying a word. The neighbor noticed, the officer noticed, and suddenly, the room felt smaller. Investigators began to dig deeper into Chris Watts' life. And that's when the cracks became fractures. Financial stress, a failing marriage, and then another detail, an affair. Chris had been seeing a co-worker. A new life was forming, one without Shanann, without the children. A clean break, except life doesn't reset that easily. Psychologically, something disturbing began to take shape. Chris Watts wasn't impulsive. He wasn't chaotic. He was quiet, methodical, passive, the kind of personality that avoids confrontation at all costs. Until avoidance is no longer an option, then it turns into something else, something far more dangerous. As the pressure mounted, investigators brought Chris in for questioning. At first, he stuck to his story. Calm, controlled, rehearsed. But lies have a shelf life, and his was expiring. Then came the polygraph, a simple test. But for Chris Watts, it became the turning point. He agreed to take it, confident, almost eager. That was his first mistake. Hours later, the examiner delivered the results. He had failed, not just slightly, completely. The room shifted, the illusion shattered, and suddenly, the calm husband sitting across from him looked very different. What happened next would shock the world. Under pressure, Chris changed his story, but not in the way anyone expected. He claimed that Shanann had killed the children. He said he walked in on it, that he snapped, that he killed her in a rage. It was a story designed to shift blame, to make himself seem human. But even that version didn't hold, because the truth when it finally surfaced, was far worse. Behind the mask of normalcy, behind the quiet demeanor, behind the calm interviews and rehearsed pleas, there was something else. Something calculated, something cold. Investigators would soon uncover the full sequence of events. A timeline that didn't just involve loss, but planning, intent, a decision made long before that morning. And here's where the story turns. Because while the world saw a husband begging for his family's return, while neighbors expressed shock, while the media replayed his interviews over and over again, Chris Watts already knew something they didn't. He wasn't searching. He wasn't hoping. He wasn't waiting. He was acting, performing, living inside a lie he believed he could control. That's the most terrifying part, not the crime itself, but the illusion that surrounded it, the way it hid in plain sight, the way it convinced everyone, if only for a moment, that everything was normal. But normal doesn't leave clues, and this case was filled with them. From the moment Sean N. walked through that front door to the final movements captured on that neighbor's camera, every second told a story. A story Chris Watts thought he had buried, but he underestimated one thing. Truth doesn't stay hidden. It waits, it builds, and eventually, it demands to be seen. Because what investigators would soon uncover wasn't just a crime of passion. It wasn't a sudden act of rage. It was something far more disturbing, something that had been forming quietly, beneath the surface, long before anyone realized. And when the full truth finally came out, it wouldn't just shock the nation. It would change how people saw everything. The interviews, the footage, the man himself. Because the real story of the Watts family isn't just about what happened. It's about how it happened. And more importantly, why. But that truth, it doesn't come all at once. It unfolds, piece by piece, detail by detail, until the full picture becomes impossible to ignore. The truth didn't come out all at once. It never does. Instead, it slipped through in fragments. Contradictions, silences, small cracks in a story that could no longer hold its shape. By the time investigators sat across from Chris Watts again, they already knew. They just needed him to say it. The room was quiet. No cameras, no press, just a table, a chair, and the weight of everything he had done pressing in from all sides. Chris sat still, hands folded, eyes distant. For a moment, it almost looked like he was thinking about what to say next. But in reality, he was running out of options. It began with a pause, then a breath, then words that would send shockwaves far beyond that room. I killed her. Simple, flat, emotionless. He started with Sean, said they had argued, said it was about separation, about the future, about everything that had been quietly breaking between them for months. But this wasn't a sudden explosion. This wasn't chaos. It was controlled, deliberate. He described climbing on top of her as she lay in bed, his hands around her neck. The slow, terrifying realization that she wasn't fighting back the way he expected. Almost as if she knew. Almost as if, in those final moments, she understood. And then came the detail that investigators would never forget. He said her eyes filled with blood, that she looked at him and didn't stop him. But the story didn't end there, because what happened next was even harder to comprehend. After killing Sean N., Chris didn't call for help. He didn't panic. He didn't break down. He moved, methodically, coldly. He placed her body on the floor, then went to his daughter's rooms. Bella and Celeste, still alive, still breathing. That detail alone shattered everything, because it meant this wasn't a moment of rage. It was a decision, a continuation. He woke them up, told them they were going for a ride, loaded them into his truck, alongside their mother's body, wrapped in a sheet. Imagine that silence, the early morning darkness, two children sitting in the back seat, unaware of what had just happened, unaware of what was about to happen. And Chris Watts, driving. Investigators would later retrace that route. A 45-minute drive to a remote oil site, a place Chris knew well, a place he had already chosen. That's what made it different. That's what made it terrifying. This wasn't improvisation. This was preparation. When they arrived, the sun was just beginning to rise. the world waking up. But out there, nothing felt alive. Chris carried Shanann's body first, dragged it across the ground, dug a shallow grave, placed her inside, covered it, just enough, and then he went back to the truck. Bella was still there, still awake, still watching. According to Chris, she asked a question, a simple one. Is the same thing going to happen to me as Mommy? That question lingers, because it reveals something no confession ever could. She knew. On some level, she understood. Chris said he didn't answer. He just acted. One by one, he took their lives. The details are difficult, not just because of what happened, but because of how, the calculated nature of it, the absence of hesitation, the silence, and then came the final act, the one that would haunt investigators the most. He placed their bodies inside oil tanks, separate, hidden, almost as if he believed they would never be found. But the truth doesn't disappear. No matter how deep you bury it, no matter how carefully you hide it, it finds a way back. Within days, investigators searched the site, and what they discovered confirmed everything. The world watched as the story unfolded, as a man who stood on television pleading for his family's return was revealed to be the one who had taken them. The Watts family murders became more than just a case. It became a question. How does something like this happen? How does someone go from ordinary to unthinkable? Psychologists would later analyze every detail. His personality, his behavior, his silence. Many pointed to emotional suppression, a lifetime of avoiding conflict, a need to appear perfect, until the pressure became too much, until the mask cracked. But even that doesn't fully explain it, because explanation isn't the same as understanding, and some things refuse to be understood. Chris Watts would eventually plead guilty. No trial, no drawn-out courtroom drama, just an ending, quick, final, quiet, or at least that's how it seemed. Because even after the confession, even after the sentencing, even after the world believed it had all the answers, something didn't sit right. There were inconsistencies, small ones, easy to overlook, but they were there. Details that didn't fully align, timelines that felt off, statements that changed, and then there were the letters. From prison, Chris began to speak again, not publicly, not loudly, but enough. And in those letters, he revealed something new, something he hadn't said before, something that changes everything. Because according to Chris Watts, what happened that morning didn't start in the bedroom. It started earlier, much earlier. And if what he's saying is true, then the story we've been told is only part of the truth. The question is, what is he still hiding? And why wait until now to say it?